afternoon. Namaste. Welcome to our fall seminar series. As you saw in the email, this year happens to be the 150th birth anniversary of Mahatma Gandhi. He lived from 1869 to 1948. So, as expected, in many parts of the world, especially in India, of course, there are massive celebrations, commemorations, analyses, etc. So we at the Center for Indic Studies decided to devote our full academic year to seminars on Gandhi. We had one in the spring, which was the Gandhi-Tagore debates. But in this semester, in this academic year, this is our first Gandhi seminar. And we have a very distinguished professor, Professor Predrag Cicovacki from the College of the Holy Cross. He has been here before, some of you may remember, 2 years ago? So Professor Cicovacki is in the Department of Philosophy at College of the Holy Cross, and he has published many books, 2 of which we have here. Last time when he came, he donated a few copies of his book, Barefoot in Banaras. Banaras, as you know, also known as Varanasi. A spiritual pilgrimage, which was the result of his Fulbright scholarship in India. He spent 5 months in India. And today he has brought with him his set of books, a 2-volume book, Non-Violence as a Way of Life, History, Theory, and Practice. And we will keep these, this Barefoot in Banaras is already in our library. We will keep the one that he gave today as well. And he also has another book, Gandhi's Footprints. Unfortunately, he has only 1 copy left with him, so we will get it, and then we will put it in our library. But besides Banaras and Non-Violence and Gandhi, he has also published, for example, on Dostoevsky. So, very accomplished scholar, publishing in a variety of areas. So, today, he will talk, of course, on Gandhi, but as you can see, his title is Gandhi in His Own Words. And the reason for this title is, as you know, Gandhi has been so much analyzed, discussed, so much scholarship on him, so much kind of public opinion on him, that sometimes we lose what the man originally said. Many people, they say, well, this is what Gandhi believed, this is what Gandhi was passionate about, but not a bad idea to see what Gandhi himself believed in his own words. So Professor Predrag Cicovacki will speak on that, and he has also promised us a short video, where we will hear Gandhi's voice, Gandhi in his own words. Okay. So with that, Professor Cicovacki.
It's a pleasure to come here again. Hope we find a way to continue our collaboration and for me to come many more times. It's always a special privilege to talk about Gandhi. It's such a remarkable man. Whatever you think of Gandhi, and he was a complex human being. Gandhi was not one-way street. There are many Gandhis, many sides of Gandhi, and because Jerry kindly invited me to be the first to speak about Gandhi in your series, I thought that I have to open up a discussion about Gandhi rather than offer any of my own conclusions. I would be hesitant about speaking about Gandhi without having at least some limited experience of India. Even though what I witnessed in India was not what I expected. I went to India to study the history of nonviolence, and especially Gandhi. And oftentimes it happened to me that people tell me, but we know nothing about Gandhi. Gandhi is not part of India anymore. This India is not Gandhi's India. And some of you who follow the politics know that the Prime Minister Modi gave a speech on October 2nd in the United Nations. That was the anniversary of Gandhi's birthday. And there's hardly anybody in India who stands further away from Gandhi and everything that Gandhi represents. And yet he gave a speech that India still needs Gandhi, and that even though India today is very far from what Gandhi envisioned India to be, but most of you here know more about it than I do. So what I wanted to go back to some of Gandhi's words. And then we'll hear that speech that I'll say a little bit about that was recorded, Gandhi's speech to people of the United States. And then I will leave you with 10 questions. So instead of providing answers, I give you questions, something to think about in this series. Gandhi, on the one hand, didn't write very much in terms of books. If you just look at the books that Gandhi wrote, I think you can find only two. One is Home Swaraj, right, early, when Gandhi, I think it was 1908 or 1909. It's about home rule of India and how India should take over the rule of its own country from the British. And it's mostly the criticism of the British civilization and Western civilization in general. And the second book is Gandhi's autobiography, the story of my experiments in truth. But despite the fact that he wrote these books, one of which, Home Swaraj, is very short, you can find actually, I think it's 98 volumes of Gandhi's.
100, yeah.
100 now, okay. And each of which has more than 500 pages. And it's Gandhi's speeches, Gandhi's correspondence, Gandhi's articles in journals that he edited. So Gandhi was enormously prolific as a writer. And oftentimes, of course, he forgot what he wrote previously and sometimes contradicted himself. Sometimes he just repeated the same thing over and over again. But let's look at some of the things. So I randomly picked 10 mostly short passages from Gandhi, and I'll try to give you a little interpretation of each passage. But they could be interpreted in different ways. So here Gandhi was born in 1869, October 2nd, assassinated in 1948 on January 31st. And here's the first quote that I wanted to start with. Pacifism, which can see the casualties only on occasional military warfare and is blind to continuous casualties of our social system, is worthless. There are pacifists who see the problem of violence only in time of war, or opposed to war. But what Gandhi was suggesting is that there's far more violence and many more victims of violence in times of peace, not in times of war. In times of war, we are well aware of the bodies that come back in coffins or that are made. But what Gandhi wanted to call our attention and the attention of the citizens of India and of the entire world is that the way our societies are organized produces violence in a systematic way. And that should be our primary focus, rather than just war and stop the war. Because there are casualties of violence every day, everywhere, in all aspects of life. And this is what Gandhi, I think, was far more interested in than just to stop this war, to stop that war. This is one of my favorite, all-time favorite quotes from Gandhi. There are thousands of quotes from Gandhi, but this one is very special because it shows you how Gandhi thought very deeply about violence. How Gandhi was not deluded, so to say, by the surface manifestations of violence. Look what he says, the roots of violence. What are the roots of violence, right? When we have a headache, we just take an aspirin, Tylenol, or something to numb the pain. But we don't do anything about the root of the pain, the reason why we have a headache. So Gandhi very much wanted to go to the roots of the problems, rather than just to stop the immediate violence on its surface. Let's see what are the deep roots that's causing us to be violent, all of us, over and over again. So look what he says. Wealth without work. Right? In America, we see it, you know, in India, there's 1% of the population now having so much enormous wealth. They probably have no idea how much they have and how to spend it during one lifetime. So it would be almost impossible to spend all of this. While the vast majority of people on this planet live around the minimum or under the minimum and suffer hungry. I think there's the United Nations released statistics several years ago that every single day, about 25,000 children, just children, die of starvation or starvation-related diseases. How many campuses would that be here? How many students do we have? How many students? Okay, so it would be like 3 campuses die of starvation, and you know how much food we waste every day. Right? Pleasure without conscience. We think if we have money, we can buy pleasures to ourselves, regardless of where that pleasure comes from and how much pain it may cost the people who stand on the other side and who have to provide that pleasure for us. Knowledge without character. This was written at the time when America used a nuclear bomb for the first time, where scientists, some of the best and brightest minds in the world, came up with the most devastating weapon. So instead of using their knowledge, instead of using their brilliance to help us produce peace and change the world, they used their minds to produce the most devastating weapons that human beings can possibly produce. Commerce without morality, right? Making shortcuts. It's all about economy, stupid, right? Most of you are old enough to remember Bill Clinton running for president for the first time, and his slogan, just like former President Obama used for the first term, "Yes, we can," right? Some of you remember, even though it turned out we didn't, right? Whether we can or cannot. President Clinton used the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid." It's all about money. Money rules the world. Money turns the world around, right? And if it's all about money, why should we care how we get to that money and how that money got into our possession and what we do with that money? It's all about money, never mind morality. Similarly, science without humanity, worship without sacrifice, politics without principles. We can talk maybe later on how it applies to our world in the United States, and I think our president is showing all too clearly how this works and what politics is about in economy. But and in some ways, believe me, I think it's good. But we can talk about it a little bit later. Okay. Everybody knows that Gandhi was a proponent of nonviolence. But Gandhi thought that our use or our reliance on nonviolence has certain limitations. That nonviolence is not an absolute principle that we should apply in every possible situation. So here's one example. I do believe there's a choice between, if there's a choice, where there is a choice between cowardice and violence, I would advise violence. These are the words of Gandhi. It's better to use violence rather than be afraid to hit somebody or defend somebody because you're afraid what the other person can do to you, right? But I believe nonviolence is infinitely more superior. Forgiveness is more manly than punching somebody, than striking somebody. And I think I love this example at the end. A mouse hardly forgives a cat. A mouse just runs away for life. You can't forget unless you are stronger, unless you're more powerful, unless you're in a position to forgive, right? Forgiveness presupposes a certain hierarchy of power, that you're at least equal, if not more powerful. A very typical Gandhi quote, actually two quotes that I really put into one. Most of the time, when we speak about force, we speak about the force that's visible, or the force, the manifestations of which are visible. We see how something's hit. We see on our news how bombs are being dropped somewhere, right? We see how the Turks are pushing the Kurds away from their own territories, or destroying an American base that just left vacant, right? But Gandhi was talking about the force that's not always visible. A force that can be stronger and is more subtle, has to be more subtle for not being visible, for not being direct, brutal, physical force, right? He's talking about what can be called a spiritual force and the force of love. One of the things I came to believe in my dealings with Gandhi, and one of the problems that I have in peace studies in the United States, after many years of teaching in peace studies, I just dropped out of peace studies at my own college. I don't want to be a member of peace studies anymore. Not because I don't believe in peace, but because I don't believe that peace is a political issue, or that peace is only a political issue, or that nonviolence is only a political issue. Peace studies, at least at most universities I know in the United States, are taken over by political science department, by political science professors and political science departments. It's all about politics. It's all about the political change. Not for Gandhi, not for Tolstoy, not for Martin Luther King, right? It is about a spiritual transformation. It is about spiritual transformation. It is about us learning not to see an enemy in someone who's striking us, but learning to see another human being who must have very serious problems indeed to hit another human being. Because happy people don't go around hitting anybody. Happy people don't go around killing anybody or hurting anybody. It's frustrated people, abused people, who turn into abusers and who want to harm others, right? So Gandhi was a politician because he had to be. But Gandhi was primarily a spiritual person and primarily believed in spiritual transformation of India, of the British, of Jinnah, or whoever he was dealing with. He was hoping for a spiritual change and transformation, a different attitude that we have. Sometimes he called it love, sometimes he called it spirituality, sometimes he spoke about religion in the form of the Gita or the Bible, but it is about the force that is gentle. It is about the force that's kind. It's the force of kindness. It's the force of understanding. It's the force of sympathy. And I added this other quote because it seemed to me that, and thank God we have two of them here in the audience too, this is something we should learn from women. This is something that they are much better about than we are. Maybe it's part of our upbringing. If you're a male, if you're a boy, you need to know how to defend yourself, how to strike back, or how to use the fact that you're more powerful than another younger boy and just grab from him whatever you want. But I think women should teach us about how to be kind, how to be patient, how to be more trusting, more understanding. And Gandhi was not ashamed to say that most of it he learned from his wife, and if you read his autobiography, he also learned much of it from his own mother, who was a very kind and patient woman. And if you look at the details of many of Gandhi's nonviolent struggles, for instance, the famous Salt March that most of you are familiar with, right, in 1930. Gandhi was in jail, so he couldn't lead the marchers to this Narsana salt factory. He appointed a woman to lead the marchers, all of them, right? And many of Gandhi's collaborators were not very happy about it. But he said he has absolutely no problem with a woman leading about 600 men in the marching over there again to trying to close the salt factory, right? Throughout his life, Gandhi figured out that he can trust women in a way that perhaps he cannot trust his male friends. And there's something to learn from that too. There's something to think about at any rate. What does that mean, that he can learn more from his wife or from his mother or from his female collaborators than from other males like Nehru or other people that were around him a lot of time? Okay. This is one very controversial quote, but also a very typical Gandhi quote. How should I explain that? The first sentence doesn't seem to make any sense, right? It doesn't seem, it goes against common sense. Any common sense, any reasoning, practical reasoning will tell you that of course the slave is far worse than the owner, right? So why does Gandhi say something like this? Would any slave owner trade with the slaves and be a slave? Would Gandhi convince any slave owner to change the roles with these slaves? Probably not. So how could Gandhi say something like that? Let me say something about the second quote and then maybe try to at least illuminate a little bit about a first sentence. Freedom and slavery are mental states. As you know, Gandhi spent almost 9 years in jail. And sometimes he said, those were the best times of my life, right? Why? Because in jail, he learned how to cook when he was in South Africa. He learned how to mend shoes, how to make sandals for himself, and he could read. Because during his formal education, Gandhi didn't learn very much. In many ways, he was an uneducated man, even though he had a formal education and became a lawyer, as most of you know. But Gandhi thought that his real book, theoretical education, happened while he was in jail. For instance, he discovered Henry David Thoreau when he was in jail in South Africa. He discovered Tolstoy, The Kingdom of God is Within You, in jail. His practical life was so busy, he had very little time to read. But then in jail, he could spend time reading or learning new skills. Gandhi says, you can be in jail, physically unfree, but mentally free, spiritually free. There's a physical freedom and there's a mental freedom. There's physical slavery and there's mental slavery. Somebody can put you in jail and you can be more free than your jailer. Because your jailer is part of the system of injustice and corruption, and that jailer maybe has no choice in terms of how to make money and feed his family and so on. And many a jailer that met Gandhi felt sorry for having to be his jailer and felt more stupid and inappropriate for having to put this man in jail and keep him arrested while he himself being free, so-called free, right? So freedom and slavery are relative things, right? Relative things to a certain extent. Gandhi says they are more in the mind than whether you have shackles on your hands or not. And I think what Gandhi meant by the first sentence, and we can talk about it, we can come back to it in your questions, was that it is worse to do evil than to be a victim of evil. There's a sentence in Western tradition, such a sentence can be found in Plato, in Socrates, and also in the Bible. It is worse to do evil than to suffer evil. That's the message. To suffer evil, it's unfortunate, but your moral conscience is clear. You don't have to necessarily do anything wrong. You can be a victim of injustice, of prejudice, racism, and so on, as Gandhi was many times, as most of his Indian, all of his Indian compatriots were in South Africa, as they were in India ruled by the British and so on. Sometimes you have no choice in terms of whether you are a slave or not. The system makes you a slave. But are you a slave in your mind? Do you accept slavery in your mind? Do you consider yourself a slave? Are you a slave of your own fears? Are you a slave of your own prejudices? And when you're a slave, I'll just say that one and then we'll move on. When you're a slave, you almost necessarily have to look for some kind of escape, for some kind of a change, for some kind of a transformation. But when you're a slave owner, you think that things are just they should be, right? You're in charge. Why should you change anything? You want to keep the system. You want to keep the injustice, and you keep promoting the injustice and doing injustice to people. Right? That may be some of the reasoning behind Gandhi's quote, and we can come back to it. But I just wanted to give it to you, offer it to you, because Gandhi often thought in terms of paradoxes.
Can I ask you a question?
Why don't we come back a little bit later, better, because there's still a lot.
This is a very important point, that's
Okay.
why I don't want to miss it. If this is the mental state only, then why did he fight for freedom then?
It is not a mental state only, but it is also a mental state, and maybe primarily a mental state. Yeah? And as you know, Gandhi himself said that if he has to choose between the liberation of India from its tradition and its prejudices and the liberation of India from the British, he would much rather have the liberation of India from its own tradition rather than the political liberation from the British.
Okay, go ahead.
Yeah? Okay. Look at this one. Gandhi the philosopher. Do not do violence to your own nature. He could have meant two things, at least two things. Do not do violence to your human nature. And then do not do violence to your own personal individual nature. Right? Look at our students who are doing violence to their own individual natures. How many of them are really gifted to be businessmen or bankers or lawyers or doctors? And yet all of them want to become businessmen or bankers or lawyers despite their own gifts and their own nature and their own talents. Because there's more money over there and good life, easy life. Or so they believe. Right? But I think what's more important for Gandhi is our human nature. He thought that when we are violent towards other people, that we violate something in our own nature, that it's more in our nature to be kind and understanding and helpful, rather than to be violent, to be cruel, to be not to show any sympathy, any lack of understanding, right? So this is something we all should be reminded all of the time. This is something we should not forget, especially when we teach our children and our students to discover what your true nature is and live in accordance with your true nature. That's what God gave you this life for. Not to become the most successful lawyer just because it's good to be a lawyer, or pays well to be a lawyer, or whatever it is that our students or our children want so badly to become. Be who you are. If you're born to be a businessman, be a businessman. If you're born to be a lawyer, be a lawyer. But not everyone's born to be a lawyer, or a politician, or a businessman, or a movie star. One of my favorite quotes from Gandhi. We tend to become what we worship. This is actually, I think, Gandhi's quote from Dhammapada, from the Buddhist, sacred Buddhist script, the first one. What we worship, we become. There was a German poet, philosopher, Goethe, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe, one of the most important of Western artists and intellectuals. And he said once something very similar. He said, tell me what you like, tell me what you value, and I'll tell you who you are. Because what we value, what we worship, is what we want to become, what we want to make sacrifices for, what we invest our energy in. Right? So Gandhi says, if you worship a baseball player, a cricket player, you want to become, you'll invest your energy into becoming a cricket player, hours and hours and hours of practice. Right? Instead of being something else, instead of investing that energy into something else. Right? The second sentence think will be clearer to you who have the Indian origin than to those who don't. There's virtually nothing in the West that can be called the art of dying. And there's something like that in Asia, all of Asia and all of India too. There's art of living and there's an art of dying. And I think Gandhi summed it up very beautifully when he says, the art of dying follows the corollary from the art of living. If you live in a beautiful way, you can die in a beautiful way. If you live in a horrible way, your death is going to be horrible too. Suffering and pain and torture. And if you're so attached to material goods, that death will be a torture for you because you have to separate from your house and from your car and from your possessions and from so everything. Right? The art of dying, one of the most important skills to learn in life. Right? And yet, do we teach our students anything about it? Do we teach our children? Do we know anything about the art of living? That's an ancient art that's been totally neglected. One more. A famous Gandhi comparing God and truth. He said, for the longest time I thought that God is truth. For Gandhi, I can say that truth with the capital T is the highest value. Right? And how else should we think about God as some kind of perfection, right? Some kind of absolute best, absolute truth. And then Gandhi said, there was a change. I realized, partially because there's so much idolatry in India and everywhere, right? How many gods are there, right? How many goddesses are there? What is a god? That relativizes the whole notion of God. And Gandhi says, no, truth is God. There's only one God. And that is truth with a capital T. That is my God. Goes together with the next quote. Gandhi was asked, how do you know that you have arrived at the truth? Different people have different opinions. Gandhi himself changed his opinion throughout his life. And then Gandhi gave a wonderful reply. Only the readiness to suffer will tell. Or only the readiness to sacrifice. If the truth is something is so important for you that you are ready to sacrifice your freedom and go to jail, or your life and die for it, that is your truth, that is your God. And that shows you that you really believe in it. What you don't believe in, you don't want to sacrifice for. If you don't believe in the importance of sacrifice, why would you allow somebody to beat you or harm you? You wouldn't put yourself in harm's way, you would run away, you would escape. Right? So, what we are willing to sacrifice for tells what God is for us, or what the ultimate value is for us. Right? So, that willingness to suffer, that willingness to sacrifice, reveal what is the most sacred to us, what is the most important to us. A similar quote along the same lines. My trust is solely in God. God stands, or truth stands for Gandhi above anything else, above this world. Many of you know that there were often times in Gandhi's life when his children were sick, when they were in danger of dying, and when the doctor recommended that the good chicken broth or some other meat with meal would help a child. And Gandhi says, no. No, we are vegetarians. We believe, we trust that God can heal the child. Right? And even his wife, because women are always more practical than men, says, but just this one time, how can you risk the life of your child for your principles? And Gandhi says, this is what we believe in. I believe in vegetarianism. I cannot violate it like that. Just because my life and my child's life is in danger. That's not good enough to violate the principle. Again, the sacrifice that you're willing to make. He's willing to sacrifice the life of his child for what he believes in. Gandhi was a paradoxical man. He was not an easy man. He was not an ordinary man. You like it or not, some of these things we wouldn't be able to do, and we wouldn't follow him, and some others we would, but we don't have to pretend that Gandhi was all saint and hero and flawless. Right? Look what he also says. I trust man because I trust God. I don't think you can really be an advocate of nonviolence unless you trust it. Nonviolence is not about not hitting another person. Nonviolence is about trusting another person. But Gandhi knew all too well. People change their minds, they hurt you, or they do things for their practical, selfish interest. How can you trust people? People lie, people break their promises. And look what Gandhi says. I'm not that naive to trust people. But I trust them because I trust God, and God tells me that there's something good in every human being. Something good in every human being. And how are we going to let this good thing in every human being grow, become dominant in a world that's so corrupt, in a world that's so used to violence and relies on violence all the time? Gandhi says, we have to feed that goodness in every human being. And we feed it by trust, by love, by nonviolence, by care. We have to help people become nonviolent. They have a potential in it. They'll probably, most of them, never develop that potential because we live in a violent world. Violence is accepted in this world as a legitimate way of defending your own interest. Why would you become nonviolent? Unless somebody waters that little seed of goodness in you, and somebody brings sunshine to that little seed of goodness in you, and somebody helps this little tiny fragile plant grow and become strong. And once it becomes strong, it can stand on its own against the wind, against the storm, against violence. But first it has to become stronger. First it has to be given food. First it has to be given care. Those are all the 10 quotes that I want to share with you. But I want you, if you can, I'm setting up that will help you. But I want to have you hear now is Gandhi's voice in, I think it was 1931 or 1932. When was the London conference about the negotiation how India should get its independence? When they stayed, they brought everybody from India for about 3 months in London. At any rate, one of these, I don't think it's 1932, could be, or 1931, I don't know. So Gandhi was in London for about 31, October, almost today, right? Today is the 18th. And Gandhi was approached by CBS people to say something to the people of America. And Gandhi says, can I have 10 minutes to think about what I want to say? And they said, yeah, sure, take 10 minutes. So he was speaking without any prepared speech, what you're going to hear, and you'll be able to read. Gandhi was speaking without any prepared speech. He just made this address that was broadcasted live, CBS radio at that time. That was before television, right? CBS broadcasted this live, let Gandhi speak to the people of America, just directly without any preparation. So please play it.
So we are going to play this now, but the audio is actually coming from the laptop. So if you want to come closer, you hear him. And the words will also appear on the screen, but if you want to hear his voice, it's better to come closer.
Try to make it as loud as you can.
There is an indefinable, mysterious power that pervades everything. I feel it, though I do not see it. It is this unseen power which makes itself felt, and yet decides all truth, because it is so unlike all that I conceive with my senses. It transcends the senses, but it is possible to reason out the existence of God to its greatest extent. Even in ordinary affairs, we know that people do not know who or why and how he moves, and yet unalterable law governing everything and every being that exists or lives. It is not a blind law, for no blind law can govern the conduct of living beings. And thanks to the marvelous researches of the Gandhi book, we can now prove that we cannot decide that law then, which governs all life, is God. Law and the lawgiver are one. I may not realize the law or the lawgiver because I know so little about it or him. Just as my denial or ignorance of the existence of an earthly power will avail me nothing, even so my denial of God and His law will not liberate me from its operation, whereas constant and the acceptance of divine authority makes life journey easier, even as the acceptance of God's rule makes life underneath easier. I do deeply perceive that while everything around me is ever changing, ever dying, there is underlying all that change a living power that changes and moves all together, that creates, launch, and recreates. That informs our of faith is God, and since nothing else that I see really subsists and always persists, He alone is, and in this power deliberate or deliberate, I see it as purely deliberate, for I can see that in the midst of death, life persists, in the midst of untruth, truth persists, in the midst of darkness, light persists. Hence I gather that God is light, light. He is love. He is the supreme good. But He is no God who merely satisfies the intellect is never done. God to be God must move the heart and transform it. He must express Himself in every smallest act of His goodness. This can only be done through a definite realization more clear than the night-tested system community. Sense perception can be and often are false and deceptive. However real they appear to us, where there is realization outside the senses, it is infallible. It is proved not by extraneous evidence, but in the transformed conduct and character of those who have felt the real presence of God within. Such testimony is to be found in the experiences of an unbroken line of prophets and sages in all countries and times. To reject this evidence is to deny oneself. This realization is preceded by an immovable faith. He who would, in his own wisdom, test the fact of God's presence can do so by his living faith. And since faith itself cannot be proved by extraneous evidence, the safest course is to believe in the uncontroverted word and moral law, the law of truth and love. Exercise of faith will be the safest, where there is a clear determination thoroughly to reject all that is contrary to truth. I confess that I have no argument to convince the reason, which transcends all that I can find is not to accept the wonder.
That's not part of our program for today.
Oh, I see. No, I thought we did.
I still have a few more things to say.
Good. Alright.
Okay. Since this is the first in a series of talks, symposium about Gandhi, I wanted to, and since I was anticipating more students here in the audience, I wanted to leave you with some questions. And those questions I formulated in a way that's impersonal. Whoever is proposing peace, nonviolence, those kind of things, I think that these 10 questions would be relevant to think about and try to compare how different peacemakers think about peace, violence, and so on. So here's the first two questions. If you want to understand Gandhi, or Tolstoy, or Martin Luther King, we have to understand what are the greatest obstacles for peace in this person's age, culture, and society. The problems that Gandhi faced are different than the problems that Martin Luther King faced, or that Tolstoy. So we have to understand the history of the country, the political situation of the country, the development, industrial development or lack of in the country. We have to understand the person in his time, or her time, right, in his age. Then another question that's very important is, what kind of peace did this person envision? Okay? It could be a political peace, the removal of the British from India. Right? That for Gandhi was not enough. That was not the peace that Gandhi envisioned. Right? Gandhi envisioned, let's say, among other things, the brotherhood of Muslims and Hindus. Did not happen, right? The changed position of women happened to some extent, right? The removal of the untouchability, legally more than practically, right? The sanitation issues, the labor, especially during the monsoon season, right? The appreciation of physical labor, the involvement of everybody in a physical labor with his spinning wheel and so on. So those are for education, right? Health issues, those are for Gandhi part of his vision for peace, far more than whether the British are there in India or they're not there in India, right? Of course, Gandhi also wanted the British out of India and was convinced that the Indians are capable of ruling their own country, which, as you know, many Indians doubt to this day, but that's a different issue, right? So we have to understand it's not enough to say peace, because peace is not just a negative category. It's not just the absence of fighting, the absence of war. Peace is primarily a positive category. What do we want? What kind of peace do we want? Not every peace is a fruitful peace. Not every peace is really stimulating the human relationship and human growth. Okay, 2 more questions. There are 10 questions. 10 quotes, 10 questions. What were this person's views on war, violence, and nonviolence? We were talking a little bit about it. There was as you know, Gandhi was greatly influenced by Tolstoy, who had a very radical, more radical view than Gandhi. For Tolstoy, violence is always bad unconditionally, and nonviolence is always good unconditionally. And you saw earlier that for Gandhi was not the case, right? You saw also that Gandhi didn't put more emphasis on war than on peace. Because he says, remember that first quote, pacifism. It's not just about pacifism, it's about violence anywhere. The systematic violence being even more dangerous, more difficult to fight against. The fourth question is very, very important. How do we think of human nature? For instance, I think Tolstoy was more idealistic and Gandhi was more realistic. Gandhi was more aware of different forces within human beings, right? That there's a force of good, but there's a force of evil. And how easy it is to push people toward evil, right? Toward reaction, violent reactions, and so on. But that's something we have to understand. What do we think human nature is? Are we too idealistic about human nature, right? Or are we too pessimistic about human nature, right? For instance, we live in a society where we feel that money can buy almost everything or everything, right? The difference between two human beings is the difference in price. You can ask Jerry, you can buy Jerry for more money than you can buy me, but it's just a question of price, not the question whether you can corrupt Jerry and corrupt me, right? Anybody can be corrupted, or so we believe, right? If you believe in the power of money. 5 and 6. I think that's also very important. For the reasons that I mentioned. For instance, obviously for Gandhi, religion was very important. right? Obviously, everything was coming from that religion, spirituality. For Tolstoy, the same thing. Martin Luther King was a reverend. He studied theology at Boston University, right? Everything was coming from the Bible and from biblical inspiration for him, rather than from some kind of he didn't want to be a president of the country or be a member of the Congress or senator or anything. It was coming from spirituality, from religion, right? But politics was also important. Economy. For instance, I don't know how much you know about Martin Luther King. I spent a lot of time studying him. He was killed at the time when he turned his attention from civil rights movement to Vietnam and poverty. After the famous speech when he gave in New York near Columbia University, he was assassinated 2 months later because he said we cannot separate a racial struggle from violence in Vietnam, from poverty for white people and for black people. Too dangerous. He was assassinated almost immediately, right? As long as he was dealing with racism, that could have been handled, or at least the politicians believe that, or the extremists believe that. Okay, this is a very important question, number 6. A lot of people preach, but don't live what they preach. A lot of people are not capable. For instance, Tolstoy preached poverty, but he was a count. He was one of the wealthiest men in Russia. His wife wanted to live like a princess, so they had 30 servants in their house, right? The food was served by servants in white gloves. Tolstoy hated it, but he didn't know how to handle it. They had 2 pianos in the living room, right? And he was preaching poverty. How do you preach poverty and have 2 pianos in your living room, right? So can this person really live up to what he is preaching or she's preaching? That's essential. How do you trust somebody who tells you one thing and does completely opposite, right? Now, Gandhi left a lot of writings, and nobody can study it all. But what are his best arguments for nonviolence, for peace? What are the strongest things that he had to say in favor of violence and nonviolence and so on and so forth? Then, every great person is misunderstood. There's no one great person. Even ordinary people are misunderstood. When we talk, imagine the misunderstandings that surround Gandhi, that surround Tolstoy, that surround virtually any great person. We have to sort them out. You know, when the gossip starts, how do you stop it ever, right? But many people, so we have to understand, if you want to understand somebody, you have to understand how is this person misrepresented, misinterpreted, misunderstood? What are the facts and what is the truth and what are the lies about this person? Okay. Every great person is still a human being. As Gandhi called his autobiography, the story of my experiments with truth. You experiment with something when you don't know for fact. If you know something for fact, you don't need to experiment, you already know. Somebody who experiments is a learner. It's using trial and error. You try something and you sometimes fail and sometimes succeed, and you want to learn from your mistake. Gandhi had his failures too, especially with celibacy. I feel that his experiments with celibacy were a disaster very often. I wrote about it in my book that Gandhi failed over there when he slept with Manu and his other niece as a almost 70-year-old man sleeping naked with 2 young girls, one of which was married and separated from her husband in order to sleep with Gandhi, and so that he can prove that he can control his sexual impulse. I think it's just wrong, but that's a different story. Gandhi was persistent in improving his purity and working on his purity to the end of his days. And then I think the only reason to study history and to study people who have lived before us is to learn something from them. If we don't learn anything from them, if we don't see how what they have to say applies to us today, however different our time and our society may be, then it's a wasted opportunity. History for learning the facts, you can go and play Jeopardy and maybe win Jeopardy and make something of it, but It's useless. History that cannot be applied to our time and to our lives is irrelevant to me. That's all I had to say. Thank you for your attention.
One is that it's a paradoxical to say that one of his quotes, he said that natural law of justice. He believed in that, right?
Yeah.
And if that is so, is it true that he preached all his life non-violence and he led a violent death? Is also natural law of justice?
I didn't get it. Try to explain again.
No, he preached almost all his life non-violence.
Okay.
But he faced a violent death.
No, but that is not his
No. According to his quotation,
Yeah.
that everything is maintained by God, law of nature.
Okay.
So is there also law of nature that, is it because of that?
Okay.
How do you explain this phenomenon? If it is natural death, I agree. But when he is being killed violently for non-violence movement and all that,
Okay.
how do you support that quotation that everything is? Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
There is a book by Nathuram Godse,
Okay.
the one who killed Gandhi.
Okay.
Why did I kill Gandhi?
Okay.
One has to look at very neutrally. Yeah, but then his answer was Gandhi was beside Nehru and Patel because they were very close. Most of the people were not agreeing with his decisions in the last moments because of he was tilting so much to Pakistan at the cost of India. There were so many
Can I just add something to you?
Yeah. I don't know if my question makes sense, only then answer.
Look at this picture. Look at this picture. What you see is flowers growing up on the side of a mountain.
Okay.
Most of this mountain is bare. Nothing can grow. It's just bare mountain that goes up. It's in Spain. It's called Montserrat. I was there this June, past June. For these flowers to grow, there has to be at least a little bit fertile soil.
Okay.
And there has to be sunshine too, and some water too. Otherwise, these flowers would not grow. Otherwise, you would have a bare stone. Right? It's like that with human beings. If we have fertile soil, it's what we're trying to provide for our children, for our students, for our society. A fertile soil, so that something so beautiful can grow. Otherwise, you just have a bare mountain. There's part of us that if we don't get enough sunshine and enough soil and enough water, we will die, or we will be some kind of a crippled tree that grows, that cannot normally grow, that's on the side, that's also a plant that's alive. A human being is like that. You see that in India, and you can see it anywhere. A child can be crippled and remain a crippled human being for the rest of his or her life. Is that natural? Well, it is, because the child didn't get enough love, didn't get enough sunshine, didn't get enough care. That's what happens naturally when a child doesn't get the good condition for development. But if you give a child sunshine and soil and water, this is what we as parents, we as teachers are trying to do. Then you hope to get these beautiful flowers, beautiful blossoming flowers that makes puts a smile on your face and makes you say, my gosh, this is so beautiful. But you know also there are cactuses and there are plants that can be poisonous, and this is all nature. This is all God's creation. And what we have to do, and what Gandhi was hoping to do with India, is to create more opportunities for people to blossom, rather than to end up being deprived and abused and crippled and illiterate and living with fear and living with hatred, which is what is happening everywhere in the world, in our society. Right? We have pretty much, I think, as a civilization, we have failed. We have so many resources, and yet we are wasting them. All kinds of, and look what we have: violence, fear, hatred, loneliness. Right? Think about how many people are lonely in this world. We have these phones that connect us instantly with everybody else in the world, and yet we are essentially lonely people. We don't know the names of our neighbors. When was the last time we really had a conversation with our neighbor? We live next to each other, and we don't know who our neighbor is. We don't know whether our neighbor is suffering or is happy, has accomplished something great, or has failed miserably. And yet we can communicate with the whole world instantly. But what is this instant communication worth if we can't see our neighbor in the eyes? If we have no time for anybody? We have advanced technologically so much. And in some ways we are crippling ourselves. We have a crippled humanity. What are we doing? What are we doing? I mean, think about this country in India. Can a big country really be sustained in a meaningful way? Or was Gandhi maybe right to think that only a small ashram, only a small community of people who care for each other can prosper? When a country becomes too big, we all become strangers. Maybe the whole political system and economic system is just all wrong. Maybe we don't need big countries and flags and nationalism and so on. Maybe what we need is just a small community where we should care about each other and look after each other. Yes, sir.
I have two examples. Abraham Lincoln and Mahatma Gandhi.
Okay.
Both faced a situation where they could have gone to partition of the country or civil war. Now, there is enough evidence to suggest Gandhi was not for independence. During World War I, he said we should not exploit their weakness. During World War II, there was military mutiny, and the Britishers wanted to. They were more scared that they'll get lynched than other way around. So now, at the end of their decision, Gandhi, both the cases there were a lot of deaths. But US is a united country. There is more peace between North and South. India and Pakistan are still fighting, threatening the world with nuclear weapons. A leader is known by his future, what happens in the future, not what happens at that moment. Now, looking at this, has Gandhi failed in his effort?
I don't know whether Gandhi failed or not. Possibly he failed.
Billions deaths, many more displaced, and we are still fighting. There is no solution at the end.
Partition was not because of Gandhi.
He was party.
No, he
The
was
decision maker, no. The ball stopped, the buck has to stop at someone. Negotiation, he was party to that negotiation deal. They could have just said, just leave as it is. They don't have been at partition.
He said that if partition of India would be
Like too many lies, this is also lie. And simple question, what did Gandhi do after 1942, which was a failure? Quit India movement. After 1942, 47, 5 years, what did Gandhi do that British left us?
Gandhi was marching from one village to another in Bihar.
Was it impactful? And my question is, was it impactful?
it strengthened the people.
No, it was mutiny by the Indian Navy. It was the court-martial of Azad in Fort in the Red Fort, which was fought by Pandit Nehru, lost, and thereafter thrown these guys out, which led to mutiny in army, which refused to fight against Navy. The Air Force and police joined them. So 100,000 Britishers with armed forces refusing to accept the order. So that was the situation. India was supposed to get independence in 1948. They advanced it. 72 days is the precise notice given by Lord Mountbatten to India. That 72 days down the line, 15th August will lead the country. Okay.
You know that this is a complex story.
Yeah.
I mean, just look at
So what is
the British did with Israelis and the Palestinians. It's
Yeah.
a similar situation,
Yeah.
right?
So that's what I'm saying. They could have
They
just
left, but they made sure that they're going to fight, and they still fight to this day. So the
So-
British were very
British.
unique.
That's what I'm saying. If the leader was sound, could have just said, Britishers, you have done your job, just leave. We'll assure you that none of you will be lynched. The country was in turmoil, there was civil war all over the place. They would have just said, Britishers, leave, and we'll take this.
Okay. You want your hand is up. You go ahead.
I'm still thinking.
Oh, you're still thinking. Okay.
I don't think the philosophy of Gandhi failed. I think the politicians and religion is so that it becomes so divisive that it fails us in our human nature of joining something that's not necessarily nurturing to the cause. You know, because we have to sacrifice sometimes to achieve the cause that he's talking about. And not everybody wants to do that for their own political or religious interests. And that's what we see all around us. You know, if you don't believe like these people, you're no good and they can get rid of you. You know, the philosophy to me did not fail. We fail, the people fail. You know, in our belief systems that we can do something different than following that philosophy. We weren't strong enough. I say we. I don't want to use they because I wasn't there at the time. Maybe I would have participated differently. But philosophically, I think he was absolutely right on target. But I think other systems around him failed because we could not agree with what he was doing.
I'm in total agreement that for non-violence. I'm saying that, but my only contention is only strong person can preach non-violence. A weak person cannot preach non-violence. And it will be wrong for me to suggest this. The President of the United States met President of North Korea only once they declared themselves nuclear. Very wrong example, but I'm trying to highlight is they reached a stage where they could talk to us. Before that, none of the president actually, they said you don't reach a status where the president can meet. So what I'm trying to say that we can only preach non-violence when we are strong. The world was peaceful when there were two nuclear powers. So you can only, when there are two powers which are strong enough to destroy each other, you can preach peace. You cannot preach peace at a time when one side is killing others, and the other side is saying, keep dying. That is not peace.
That is precisely Gandhi's philosophy.
That's what he was trying to say.
Yeah.
Britishers were not non-violence in today's context when you are the one who is governing it. Like non-violence in an independent country is perfectly okay. Non-violence against imperialism is not the right context. That's my line.
Okay.
It's not the right
I
context.
understand that.
Non-violence and for non-violence. It is right.
Truthfully,
Battle.
truthfully, the independence of India was not because of non-violence.
Yeah, it is not because of non-violence. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, because a lot of people sacrificed.
Yeah.
It would be unfortunate, all the bloodshed, all the people who sacrificed, particularly I come from Bengal, I know how many people they sacrificed, Speech Savarkar from my...
One school of thought was mutiny in armed forces. That was one school of thought. And in World War I, they tried that.
Can let him speak, yeah, please.
So I'm saying that it is not only non-violence, but non-violence had its own lessons for the nation. Purify yourself, build your character. All those good things, came to India through his, and also the small cottage industry and all those things that were there. But definitely, the British did not leave just because of his non-violence.
Yes, you are right. There is one opinion in the Second World War, the portion of Indian army that fought was the greatest group of people. And British noted, everybody noted that this is the army now going back to India.
Yeah.
And if British don't listen, army wise, they will be chopped down like that. So becoming wiser to the next step was to go happen because they noticed themselves that this army, French army, fought for them vigorously in a different country and winning the war because of that. And they were afraid of that if this group of army,
They were scared of mutiny.
so they beforehand they decided.
Yeah, because Britain was very much devastated by the Second World War.
Yeah.
Their economy was declined, and Churchill, who was the Prime Minister at that time, that guy also lost the election next to Mount Italy immediately after that. And Mount Italy was the
Clement.
Huh?
Clement.
Clement Italy, I'm sorry. Clement Italy was the Prime Minister, and he decided on his signature India got the independence. But they asked, why did you? Because Churchill was very much against it. why are you leaving India? I mean, this is our pride possession. He said, we can't be India under our control anymore. You know, we can't, the Indians do not depend on, for their trade on British. We cannot control the Indian army, the point that he said. Because Subhash Chandra Bose's INA had attacked India once before, and they had declared that he is dead or something. But British were not sure. British were not sure whether this man, Subhash Chandra Bose, is just spreading a rumor. He might not be dead, and he might be preparing another mutiny against them. Besides, Subhash Chandra Bose was such a charismatic person that he could talk from the Rangoon, and he can incite the Indian army, lay down your arms, and all the Indian army will do that. That's why they would say, we can't really rule India without 20,000 or 30,000 or 100,000 British soldiers. So this is good that Gandhi is asking, begging for that. We leave the country with honor. That was the reason that.
Another thing I want to highlight, I'm not trying to support Adolf Hitler. He's a grown man. He's the worst thing in the world. But how many of us know, and how many times Gandhi has raised his point, that more than 3 million people were killed because of Churchill's decision to starve them to death. They were actually starved to death. 3 million Bengalis were killed because Churchill moved the ship which was supposed to offload as a reserve stock for British soldiers that they may require. But those 3 million people were killed. So you are trying to tell that guy, okay, you kill 3 million, it's okay. We are not going to harm you, we are not going to press you, we are not going to do this thing. We want to do social reform. Now, when we are independent for last 70 years, social reform is automatically catching on. The political reform was more important than the social one. Social one, today, India is more peaceful than it was during British time or after independence. There is less number of communal riots, there is more peace. The younger generation believes in peace. In general, they believe in peace. I am not talking about isolated incidents that happens everywhere. But in general, everyone talks about peace. Everyone says we should live peacefully, peaceful levels. No, that's a separate issue. The stats, I'm saying the numbers, data, the criminal records, I'm saying there is less communal violence, there is less this thing. So what I'm saying is the political independence has led to social reforms, which was not in Gandhi's philosophy. His philosophy was the other way around.
Gandhi wanted the other way around.
The other way around. So what I'm saying is, had Gandhi survived, had there been no World War II, you would have still been under British rule.
But remember that Gandhi did not ignore politics, right? He was a member of the Congress Party, he participated, he knew that he has to get involved. He didn't march to Bihar and Bengal all of the time. Only when he was completely desperate and didn't know how to stop the violence that he was going from one direction.
He never wanted to participate.
But in the last days,
in
the last days, hardly anybody will.
No, but if you look at Bengal, Nehru's famous quote, "one man army," just one person, Gandhi in Bengal, he probably saved hundreds of thousands of lives. Whereas the army at that time was trying to quell violence in Punjab and the United Provinces. So
he is moral.
Yes, just on the basis of his moral authority. And there are people who have done research saying that when India got independence, what kind of bloodshed happened, how much violence. You compare it to the other countries which followed India, especially in Africa, much more violence, much more bloodshed. So the thesis being that this one-man army or this one person, he had so much moral authority that people listened. And had it not been for him, yes, we would have gotten independence, no question. Just it would have been much more bloodshed, much more violence. So, of course, these are hypotheticals. Nobody can answer.
Also, a lot of things depend on the culture of that area.
Of course.
Indian culture as such has never been violent. So before the Gandhi came to Punjab, there was not much violence.
Those kinds of general statements
I'm
are very
saying,
problematic.
No, I'm saying purely historical. Gandhi came as for independence in 1930. He came, he was during World War I. He was working for the British ambulance service something. He was even rewarded for this. When he came to India in 1915, he was against pressurizing British for independence. The result was, after end of World War I, country like Canada, Australia, they got dominant status. We didn't get anything. So your effort has to get something fruitful. His effort did not yield anything fruitful for India. Thereafter, if you look at his track record or Indian track record, apart from that mutiny of 1857, it was again a mutiny. Everyone in obstruction at least was convinced the only way to throw them out is mutiny, because they are the armed soldiers and these 100,000 British are ruling with the help of something far superior number. If you create, there was effort made during World War I, which was a failed mutiny. So there was a group which was fighting for this particular thing. So if Gandhi would not have been here, Gandhi was not there before 1950. Do you have any record to suggest India was falling before 1950? There is no record. So it's not because Gandhi said don't protest everyone. Follow Gandhi. It was basically no one was trying. Even Quit India movement, no one participated. Everyone, like you said, Mysore, Vilism, they didn't even bother who's ruling there. Was it Aurangzeb? What Britishers could walk into, because everyone was so frustrated with Aurangzeb and his rule that they did not matter who's ruling them. They said when Lord Clive was there, every person would have, in place of flower, they had one stone, British would have finished by that. There was such a small number. But the common man was so frustrated. For them, it hardly mattered who's ruling them. They were getting exploited as it is. It's Aurangzeb, it's Britishers, or whoever, Maharaja, warrior, Baroda, whoever it is. It doesn't matter. So,
It's a very complex story.
Yes,
It
yes.
is very complex.
yeah.
And we have to leave this room in 5 minutes. So if you have any last minute questions,
No,
please.
not question, one simple observation. October 2nd, normally we celebrate, everybody knows, everybody in India knows October 2nd, birthday of, not many people are aware that the same day, birthday of Lal Shastri also.
So you did it
Lal
again?
Bahadur Shastri.
Yes.
Who was
Lal
the
Bahadur
Second
Shastri was the
Second
Prime
Prime
Minister.
Minister.
He was also born on the same day.
Aha.
Not many people remember that, everybody thinks October 2nd comes in. Also Lal Bahadur Shastri, but not many people.
And he died in Tascan while doing some heavy lifting.
Recently.
He was also a great person.
What we learn, that's what we
Yeah,
learn. We
mysterious
don't know the
death.
truth.
It's a hostile country because it was the Russia who had moved the resolution in UN to stop the war. In that particular case, Russia was against India, and he died in Russia.
And he was also a great person. Shastri was a great
Oh,
person.
yeah.
But not many people remember him.
Actually, the death of Kennedy was a blow to India that particular time because Kennedy was for India.
Yeah, but only
Yeah, for a small period.
superficially much.
Yeah.
None of them. I mean, Roosevelt, the story is that
All
Roosevelt
the-
told Churchill that you
All
cannot
the
hold on to
teachings of
India for
Gandhi
too long.
that we had been taught in schools, in our school at our time, are not being taught today. And,
Gandhi is losing its relevance in modern. More and more younger persons are disliking Gandhi than actually like. The major follower of Gandhi are the older
I
generation.
became aware of that.
Yeah, they are
But
older
that may be
generation
only
because
India.
more and more people are learning that it's a propaganda which started with Britishers and followed by Congress. That they are trying to find a lot of faults.
But today that may be only in India. Because
I'm talking about India. I'm talking about
worldwide,
India.
his relevance, acceptance has been growing.
I'm talking not outside India, I'm talking purely India. I'm
Please.
talking about
Well, I'm the youngest one here and maybe not experienced as all of you. As she said, we failed Gandhi and we just failed his philosophy like non-violence, social reform. Like, for example, he said, I don't want to get into debate, but I don't think that only like people outside India are like admiring him and not the ones in India. Like me, like my family, we are all like Gandhi followers. We always follow non-violence and like till the extent we can do it. And I don't think the present like political situation in India is like what is following the Gandhian philosophy. Like he said that the non isolated non-violence is we cannot count isolated non-violence happenings in India, but it's more peaceful now, but if you look into the data, it's like more violent now compared to last 70 years. This should be like the 100th birth anniversary of Gandhi, but it's like there is bloodshed happening everywhere in India. There, like people are just killing.
Yeah.
And also, what he said, you have to read like Natram Godse neutrally, but you don't have a right to kill anyone. As simple as that. There was one like a point where it says art of living will like affect your art of dying.
Yeah.
And he said Gandhi like lived for non-violence, and he had the most violent death.
And then his assassin was also sentenced to be hanged, despite the protest of Gandhi's sons and even Nehru at that time
But
protested.
even if it was a violent death, what were his last words? It was Hey Ram. So he was completely at peace.
But never in the history that the assassin and the assassinate both were martyrs. Never in the history that the never occurred. Both the assassin and the assassinee were martyrs.
But that happened to John F. Kennedy's murderer also. John F. Kennedy's murderer, that guy and his guy, and then
Lee Harvey Oswald.
yeah, Lee Harvey Oswald, and then the other guy was also killed. Lee Harvey Oswald. So, and apparently,
Anyway, I
is
think
crossed.
we have to wrap up. So thanks again to Predrag.